Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this third panel of the day, Contested Commons, Participation and Public Space. I'm sure after the good lunch we've had, it may be a little difficult for us all to be here and pay attention, but I promise you all this panel is going to be quite exciting. I have with me a bunch of friends and old colleagues, and I'm so very excited to be moderating this panel. My name is Pratigna Punacha. I'm a researcher at the School of Environment and Sustainability here, and my own area of work is around climate change adaptation in urban and peri-urban geographies. So we have a fantastic lineup of 6 presentations for this panel. They are spread across geographies from streets of Bangalore and Mumbai to political landscapes of Goa and Bhopal, and as well as pastoral landscapes from Gujarat. So it's a big spread. And a common thread that connects these presentations, all of these presentations, is the understanding and illustration that public space and commons is not a neutral background. And there's a lot of contestations and negotiations between top down, state centric imaginations of planning and bottom up lived experience of people. There are some tensions that are recurrent across all the presentations. Tensions between, like I said, top-down state-centered imagination and citizens. Also, a more tension around planning as currency, which Tahir will speak about, and also monetization of land, as in the case of Mumbai. Speculative urban development driven by private lobbies and state agendas, leading to the acquisition of land for urban aspirations at the expense of local livelihoods and local people. Some of these presentations also touch upon aspects of dispossession, displacement, grief, loss, and vulnerability of marginalized communities. So we have a lot to cover through these 6 presentations. We have 2 presentations that are online, and the rest of the panelists are here in person. So general ground rules, 12 minutes per presentation. We'll keep the questions for the end so that all the presenters have time to present their discussions. So we'll start first with folks online. The first presentation is it's titled Mumbai's Public Open Spaces, Access, Conflict and Stewardship. Presented by Ashwini Deshpande. She's from NAGAR NGO in Mumbai. Prerna Yadav, Urban Design Research Institute, UDRI from Mumbai, and Sudhanshu Patra, also from NAGAR NGO in Mumbai. So over to the first presentation.
All right. In this presentation, we focus on public open spaces in Mumbai and present 4 examples, case studies, to explore how these spaces are developed, accessed, and continuously negotiated. We begin by setting out a brief historical context of Mumbai city. Mumbai's growth has been shaped by its distinctive geography and layered history. Originally, as a cluster of 7 islands, the city was reconfigured through land reclamation, colonial planning, and major infrastructure projects. As a port city and industrial hub, it drew migrants from across the subcontinent, with land largely organized around commercial and industrial use. As pressures mounted in the island city, growth gradually moved northwards, with suburban railway and planning controls structuring the expansion into the suburbs. Today, the land is highly contested commodity in Mumbai, with competing demands ranging from public amenities and affordable housing to land value capture and private profit. Through planning tools and policies, the city continuously attempts to strike a balance between providing essential amenities and housing while also generating sufficient value to sustain economic growth. However, conflict arises when one demand is prioritized or trumps over the others. Against this backdrop, we examine public amenities and specifically the open spaces in this city through the lens of policy, stewardship, and conflict that shape their development and access. Over to you, Prem.
Firstly, we look into the case of redevelopment of textile mills in the city. It's a well documented case that the conflict around these mills in Mumbai first arose as an employment, fair wages, and livelihood concern, but soon it transformed into an urban development issue. Next slide. In 1990s, the government, in consonance with economic liberalization, looked at the sale of land, next please, at the heart of the city as a way to mitigate the crisis from the mills shutting down. Next, it proposed two options in the 91 DP. Firstly, a one-third rule where the owner could choose to sell one-third of his mill property at an increased FSI of 1.33 and surrender the rest for the public amenities and housing. In exchange, he would receive TDR. TDR now was first introduced in 91 in the Mumbai development plan. So this was the first instance of TDR being completely sketched out in the DP. And this proposal could have generated lands for public amenities and housing stock to the tune of 290 hectares. However, the mill owners chose the second option, which was selling 15% of their property, but they did so without reinvesting the returns into modernization of the mills, which was a mandate. Next, additionally, they also let out the existing structures for commercial activity on pretext of workers' canteen, recreational centers, and we could see bowling alleys and McDonald's cropping up in these areas. And in the face of this blatant misuse, next, the government formed a committee or a study group led by Charles Correa, and for the first time, the redevelopment of textile mills was addressed as a larger urban development issue. The entire precinct of government owned textile mills was looked at holistically. Next, land breakup was renegotiated to benefit both the mill owners and the city as a whole. Total plot FSI generated was allowed to be consumed in situ. Next, however, the report never saw the light of the day, and the state government intervened to issue a clarification on the original DCR 58, stating that the mill owners could deduct all existing structures before calculating the land to be surrendered to the city. So the one-third rule stayed, but it was highly diluted. And the city was about to lose open spaces, large connected greens, public amenities, and lands for these to the tune of 81 hectares. Next. However, a few hopeful stewards seeked out the judiciary to intervene. NGOs like UDRI organized a task force to prepare detailed plans. BEAG filed a PIL. It was also supported by the workers' union, the Girni Kamgar Sangharsh Samiti. The movement saw different voices from different domains join hands, as now the discussion was not limited to just livelihoods or jobs, but had evolved into a conversation about quality of life and the future of the city. Next. But while the High Court put a stay on the amended DCR 58, the Supreme Court ruled in the favor of the mill owners, upholding the amended regulations' validity. Next. While the textile mills conflict has come to an end, its success can be debated, but it has set precedents in the city. Firstly, for cluster redevelopment, rather than looking at smaller parcels individually, looking at larger precincts, which has now become a part of the current DCR as Regulation 33.9. TDR has become an important tool in the city to acquire more open spaces from private parties in the city. The conflict also set precedents for how citizens or citizen voices have begun to engage in civic issues, calling upon partnerships, social capital, the judiciary, and the media for support. But primarily, it has shaped the approach of the city to real estate and to redevelopment, the merits of which are, of course, debatable, as is seen in the SRA policy.
Moving to the SRA policy, which is another important aspect to look into when we are discussing about urban commons in Mumbai. This historical trajectory has led to conflict between the right to housing and the right to public space in the city. As the city expanded under conditions of land scarcity and profit driven development, informal settlements grew incrementally on vacant and marginal lands, forming large pockets. Mumbai's open spaces are also very unevenly distributed across the city. The island city and older suburbs contain some of the largest maidans, gardens, and recreational space, while rapidly growing peripheral areas and informal settlements often have very little to no accessible public greenery. This disparity is further deepened by redevelopment pressure and real estate driven land use, leaving marginalized communities with limited opportunities for recreation, social interaction, and environmental relief. Nearly half of Mumbai's population live in the informal settlements characterized by extreme density, incremental construction, and limited access to basic infrastructure. Within these dense clusters, public open spaces are virtually absent, with streets, setbacks, and residual gaps often doubling as spaces for interaction, play, and livelihoods. The scarcity of planned open spaces intensifies environmental vulnerabilities such as heat stress, flooding, and poor air circulation while reinforcing social and health inequalities. A reading of the development plan sheet, as you can see on the right side, on the left side of the PPT, it shows that open space reservation offers very limited clarity about existing on ground condition. In some instances, land reserved as public space was later occupied by informal settlements, while in others, informal settlements were already present before the land was formally designated as open space through planning instruments. Several such plots have remained unchanged since 1991 development plan, with neither slum redevelopment nor open space development undertaken. A major shift emerged when, when the approach to such lands moved from eviction to in situ rehabilitation in the city. With the introduction of Slum Rehabilitation Authority in 1995, this conflict intensified as land occupied by slums was no longer treated solely as encroached public land, but as a site for housing redevelopment. As a planning solution, these lands were subdivided into three components: one third allocated for rehabilitation of housing, one third released as a sale component to cross subsidize development, and one third retained for the original public reservation as envisioned in the development plan. So, on the right, you can see the land that was originally designated as open space and occupied. Ultimately, after the redevelopment process only 35% of that came to the city. While this model aimed to balance housing provision with public interest, it also resulted in the further reduction of public open space, intensifying disputes over land use and access to public amenities. This development driven model has led to fragmentation and reduction of open space, while the high rise redevelopment housing often falls short of basic livable standard. These outcomes have generated sustained conflict, prompting legal challenges to SRA norms and ongoing demand from civic society and community groups for more equitable ways of managing such land. Judicial interventions around SRA development, most notably the writ petition 1152 of 2002 filed by Nagar and the Supreme Court directed suo motu audit of the Bombay High Court, underscore the role of civic engagement in contesting the way slum rehabilitation schemes are being developed, particularly when they impact public open space. These cases reveal how sustained advocacy and legal action have emerged as a key tool of conflict stewardship, challenging market driven interpretations of Slum Act and SRA regulation, while seeking to protect housing rights alongside the long term stewardship of public open spaces. While SRA related litigations foreground conflicts between housing right and open spaces, similar tension also surface in heritage and civic precincts across India. The next two examples will be specifically on the open spaces, which are quite important in the city. Over to you, Sudhanshu.
Yep. Next slide. Veer Mata Jijabai Bhosle Botanical Udyan and Zoo, also known as Rani Bagh, was set up way back in 1862. This built and natural heritage landmark is Mumbai's only botanical garden with over 4,000 trees belonging to 250 plus species and a small zoo segment. In 2007, MCGM announced its plan to transform it into an international zoo exhibit at a cost of rupees 433 crores. The citizen group Save Ranibagh Botanical Garden Foundation reviewed the proposal and it lacked the necessary approvals from the Central Zoo Authority and Mumbai Heritage Conservation Committee. Next slide. The proposal featured international and Indian zones, a night safari, an aquarium, etc. In the 49-acre campus, the botanical garden occupies 63% of the area, and the zoo occupies nearly 18% of the area. These new features would have encroached upon the botanical garden, and the existing axial layout, pathways, and water bodies would have been destroyed. The Save Rani Bagh Foundation approached the Bombay High Court, raised awareness through campaigns, involved other organizations, and kept constant pressure on the government. With the support from MHCC members, the CZA Review Committee, industry experts, other organizations, and government offices, The proposal was rejected in March 2011. Next slide. In 2014, when the current development plan was being prepared, the reservation of Rani Bagh was changed from garden to zoo with an FSI of 5. The foundation filed suggestion objections in 2015 and 16 to push Botanical Garden as the new designation. The designation was accepted by the Planning Committee for Rani Bagh, and the Urban Development Department sanctioned this in 2022. Similar battles over proposals, illegal constructions, and changes in the reservation are fought every day in the city. Next slide. Another example of this is the Jawaharlal Nehru Garden in South Mumbai. In DP in 1967, it was designated as Green Zone, and then it was designated as RG in 1981. Since then, the open space area had been taken over by offices of various government agencies and political parties, and the entire area was lost. NPCCA, a citizen group, started working on this issue in 1992. They wrote to the Urban Development Department requesting it to remove all the structures and restore the land to its intended use as a recreation ground. A few temporary structures were removed, but a new Paka structure was constructed on the site. NPCCA filed a writ petition in 2013. Next slide, please. With the release of the new draft development plan, the garden showed the change in designation from RG to commercial and residential use. The Bombay High Court passed an order in 2016 stating that the original designation of RG will be restored. And in 2023, the Jawaharlal Nehru Garden was inaugurated by the Deputy CM of Maharashtra. Next slide. In conclusion, Mumbai's history shows that the public open spaces are not passive outcomes of planning, but are continuously negotiated through conflict. From mill land redevelopment to SRS schemes and contested heritage landscapes such as Rani Bagh and Jawaharlal Nehru Garden, urban land has largely been shaped by conflicts. Have largely been shaped by extractive real estate-led logics and prioritize economic returns over collective urban commons. Yet these conflicts have also enabled civic engagement, legal intervention, and forms of stewardship that have challenged dominant development paradigms. Together, these struggles highlight the urgent need for clear and enforceable guidelines to strengthen public open spaces, guidelines that go beyond reservation to ensure spatial continuity, ecological quality, accessibility, and long term public stewardship, and that translate planning into meaningful, usable urban commons. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to you with questions at the end of all the presentations. Now we'll move on to the second presentation of the panel. It's called Contesting the Smart City, Three Sites of Resistance in Bhopal by Kalki. Yeah, Kalki, all yours.
So thank you so much for the opportunity to present it. So I think one thing, my presentation is on contesting the smart city, three sites of resistance in Bhopal. I understand it right now as a working paper because it is also a continuation of a research study that I undertook in 2023 within the Bhopal smart city, and now I am extending it to also look at how resistance has shaped through case studies and the analysis of the same. So I think the first thing is that it has been a national plan that started in 2014 to 2016. And in that process, Bhopal was one of the first 20 that was selected within the Smart Cities program. And in now that we are at the 10 years plus in the Smart Cities, now we have a lot of information around each of them, which are often faced through case studies that come from Ahmedabad, Hyderabad, Dholera, Bhopal, and among others. And one thing is also there that even as recent as some of the case studies that have come in 2025, they also kind of note this issue with having more empirical data to support or analyze the impact of smart cities so far. And in that case, building these case studies also becomes very important, which also at times come through qualitative research. So a lot of my work here and the focus here would be on the qualitative analysis through the field work that I did in 2023. It's also continuing right now, and also secondary research that was conducted. So when we look at the Bhopal smart city, before I move into the analysis of the same and what the bedrock of my previous research that it builds from, so we see that there was an SPV, which is a feature of all the smart cities, special purpose vehicle that was built in Bhopal, which is the Bhopal Smart City Development Corporation Limited. And what it did is that there was first an area that was designated. So the reason Bhopal Smart City also came in with the first 20 smart cities to be selected was because of the fact that it introduced the area based development from a very unique lens, that is, instead of retrofitting within already developed areas within the city, it wanted to develop a new area from scratch. And how it did that through, and that is also a reason that the smart city the corporation has also informed that that is one of the main reasons that the selection happened. So what we did see in the history of the smart city in Bhopal over the first few years was that first the area was designated to be between Shivaji Nagar and Tulsi Nagar, and then it was later shifted to TT Nagar, which is one of the sites. These are both the sites that I move on to further. And then to also implement the smart city road, there were evictions that happened from Deepa Basti, Hasnat Nagar, and Hatha Rustam Khan, which are a part of the Banganga slums near the Regional Science Center in Bhopal, as well as within the TT Nagar, because it is a 90% government land and government employees were living there. They were rehabilitated and the government housing was demolished. But at the same time, there was also a hustling economy that was existing within the area itself, which is now kind of being developed from scratch. So it is somewhere like a land which is not used as much. And in that process, there were also evictions of the local shopkeepers from TT Nagar. And this is the area that I take into account from the resistance that emerged. But the idea for the Bhopal Smart City has been that there needs to be a development of a world class city that we see through a smart road, boulevard, street signature complexes, and a hard bazaar, as well as redevelop residential areas. And it has now also expanded to redeveloping the heritage buildings in Bhopal. Initially, the focus of my initial study was to look at how infrastructural harm is happening through the smart city when it implements something like urban renewal in itself, and what are the cases of dispossession that are coming in between in that process. So what how I did is through an ethnographic research method to undertake an exploratory study that happened through primary data collection, a lot of field visit, and I did that through and conversation and positionalities of four core representatives and stakeholders within the smart city. First were the planners, interviews, and in person interviews with them, which was the Bhopal Smart City Corporation. The second was related to the political representative, which included the municipal councillor, who is from the BJP party, and the third, whose case study I build on now, is the traders union, the Jawahar Chowk Vyapari Sangathan, and the activists who have been working with the slum residents who were dispossessed from Banganga and Hatha Rustam Khan. And fifth aspect that I taken further into the study is to look at the citizens action group that was developed in Shivaji Nagar in Bhopal during the first implementation of smart city, that the area based development would happen there, but later it was shifted. And in the initial study, on the also noting the kind of the political representatives, the perspectives that emerge from all of these four positionalities, it also led me to understand that the positionalities from the planners and political representatives, particularly, have focused a lot more on a positive development that is happening through smart city, because it will kind of lead a capital inflow within the city and develop it further. At the same time, this ongoing speculation also has been resisted by the traders union and activists, particularly in that process. So there were two positionalities that were emerging during the initial study. And how I look at it is also through four aspects of it: the spectacle, speculation, dispossession, and the harm that comes through the process of displacement and dispossession within the smart city. And what I look at it also in terms of the depoliticization, which has constantly reduced the capacity of the stakeholders to partake in the process, because participatory governance is not is there is a tricky ground around which it has been practiced, at least in Bhopal, also in a way that in through interviews and secondary research that was conducted, it has been visible that the participatory research was often a one or two Johnson wise or even a survey that was conducted through online means, and that did not include a lot of the stakeholders who were in the process. But at the same time, there is a spectacle that is developed through kind of the language, the imagery that is being used for the smart city, which is a feature across the smart cities in India. And at the same time, particularly in Bhopal, The logic was to also kind of unlock this value of land and underused government land over the next 10 years. But now, through some reports itself that have come out in the last couple of years, we also see that now the same land which has been used for urban renewal is also now being seen as a wasteland, because there is no activity or any sort of even an economic activity that is happening there, because and also encroachments upon land have started happening. Then we see the dispossession aspect of it, which is where there are three groups which who have been particularly being dispossessed. I look at two of them. One is the traders union, and one is the slum residents from Ahata Rustam Khan. And the fourth thing is also in the initial study was to look at how harm and slow violence have accrued and accrued due to the same things, due to the which has led to the loss of livelihood and extended cost of displacement for all of the parties involved. So when we look at, so I think one thing that came clear through like these interviews and the analysis, what that Bhopal smart city, like the smart city structure itself, the access through which development is imagined is through the expert led and technologically focused infrastructure that happens to urban renewal. And there is a certain the use of language around it is also often very neutral, in a way that this is something that would lead to greater economic results later on, and also the capital inflow that will coming in. But I think one thing that I also problematize there and also build on the work moving forward is to see that how, while that is the development, that is how development is being imagined and implemented in the city, but at the same time it has shifted its paths a lot of time continuously, because of a lot of ground realities, negotiation, and the resistance that has coming in, which is also reshaping what the smart city comes to be within a context of Bhopal. And when we look at the three, so that leads me to also look at three sites of resistance now in my current in like engagement with resistance within the smart city in Bhopal, is to look at how there are three regions, particularly where I describe them as Site 1, Site 2, and Site 3, which is one is Tulsi Nagar and Shivaji Nagar, second is Tatya Tope Nagar, and the third is Smart Road. And I'll quickly go through all three of them to also take you through the paths that each of these stories have developed over the years, and also there's a difference in how each of them kind of approach the recourse through which they could show their grievance or even resist. And there's a that also informs us a lot into how the democratic or even the participatory governance within this has worked. When we look at site one, which is Shivaji Nagar and Tulsi Nagar here, we also need so this is the first resistance, that this is the first kind of protest that came up when the Bhopal smart city was planned. This is around the time of 2016 and 2018, where the residents of Shivaji Nagar and Tulsi Nagar, the area based development was planned there, which would mean that these are also again government residential areas, that they would be uh, they would be given rehabilitation, and the area would be developed from scratch. But again, the notable thing here is that the residents of the region include very influential bureaucrats, journalists, and other economically and socially affluent groups. And when they created a citizen action group within their own communities, they organized that, and then they argued that this would also lead to the loss of environment in the region. And the news also reports that Bhopal residents were concerned that thousands of trees would be cut. And through this process, there was a lot of pressure group and lobbying that happened. And within a period of 2 months of the protest, the proposed plan for the smart city was then shifted to Tatya Tope Nagar. So there are also gradations here of who is protesting and what is the result, what is the paths they take here. These are some of the key things that I also note moving further. When we look at site 2, which is the Science Center Road, and now it is called the Smart Road. So it was a road that was already existing. It was kind of increased in width, which also led to disposition of sections of Banganga and Hatha Rustam Khai slums. Around 190 homes and 60 shops across that 2.5-kilometer stretch have been were dispossessed, and ideally they were given housing the is during within the PMAY scheme, and in that process they were also put in transit home, which a lot of them still live in till now. The issue being that the first strain of the protests that come in is during 2016 for this, which then the activists and the residents went to the MP High Court, petitioned for it, and there was a stay that was that there was a stay that was put on the development of the smart road. which they say that there has been a lack of consent. The notices of illegal settlement have been sudden, and the state response to the same has been that this a road has already been planned in the master plan of 2005, and the residents have come later, and contentions around the same. Ultimately, the MP High Court removed the stay and the road was constructed. And in that process, then over the next 4 to 5 years, activist efforts have been through Nagar Adhikar Manch and Basti Suraksha Manch. And they've also published a report which they have not published officially yet, but like because of some issues. But that report is something that has also informed a lot of my information, and again interviews with the activist groups that happened in Bhopal back then. And then, due to the removal of these houses, a lot of the homes have been shifted to transit camp for a period of 3 years. That has still continued till today. And the PMI housing, the only issue with that being that the PMI housing has been much in the outskirts of the city, which is away from the livelihoods of most of the residents who have been dispossessed, which is why a lot of them also preferred to live in the transit camp with also issues related to heat stress and other amenities not being available within the transit housing. Additionally, there has been an issue with your costs in terms of, or not only that, they are now incurring nearly double the cost of what they were paying for general transport to reach livelihoods, or just areas for even recreation or even access to resources. But at the same time, a lot of the slum, even beyond the slum area, the section of the slum which has been dispossessed, the Bandhanagar slum area itself also thrived on an economy that was built within the TT Nagar area. And when we look at that, the loss of life, like the urban renewable over the last 7 years that has happened now, it has also led to loss of livelihoods for this entire area, which sits right adjacent to it. And then we also have a case of Mr. Deepak Sahu, for whom his earnings reduced by half because as a mechanic because of the same. This is also coming from interviews with the activists and from their reports, the reports that they have published. This is nearly, and there's also been a huge question that they have posed to the government, which has often not been resolved, even through the municipal councillors, as a lot of interviews with the councillors also suggested. So they also see this kind of a protest from the smart city road and from the slum areas as a nuisance to their own functioning. And then secondly, Mehrunasa tells us about how, earlier there was still access to resources, to regular vegetable vendors, to regular water, etc. But now, just for basic amenities, for basic transport, now they have to wait for longer hours, go longer routes, and to get to their own livelihoods. And again, the livelihoods have been threatened because of the loss of the area that was TT Nagar earlier. Also, considering the fact that TT Nagar is in the center of the city and it has been one of the most important economic spaces. And site 3 here, now I directly come to Tata Tope Nagar, which is the site for the area based development and the process of urban renewal. And in this process, we have particularly I interviewed the Jawahar Nagar Vyapar Sangathan, which is a union of 140 shopkeepers and traders who have been living and who have also protested since 2020 because they were allocated temporary shops after their shops were removed and the urban renewable initiative started. Their issue was also the same, that the patta sanctions that they were given were not accepted within the Bhopal smart city, and and any approach to the municipality was also tricky because now the smart city has shifted to the special purpose vehicle, which goes beyond the municipal. Yes.
Kalki, can I ask you to wrap up in the next minute or so? We're out of time.
Yeah. So this is one thing, and so their protest also led to Talabandi, the downsize of markets and livelihoods. At the same time, the official compensation for the same has been through allocation of shops to them in the Hard Bazaar that is being built. But the only problem with that being that Hard Bazaar in general. So Hard Bazaar is something, it's been the proposed like this. The currently constructed Hard Bazaar has been done, but the issues with the same infrastructure of the same has been that, one, the shops are too small. Second, there have been issues in terms of the allocation of they being preference given to certain shopkeepers and others who are not interested in taking the Hat Bazaar shops, and also who are informal workers within these shops, do not have any resolution or a compensation that has been made as of yet. And also facts, also issues with the construction and the infrastructure of the Hat Bazaar, which kind of went in like during the downpour, during rainy seasons. It usually there's water logging that happens there, which is anyway detrimental for their business. So currently, Hat Bazaar also stands unused as of now. And the last thing I also want to say in the side three is that the when we look at, first thing is that we looked at the site one, where the approach was to was lobbying, was looking at how was looking at a lot like through like pressure groups. The second site was going through the route of legal recourse, and the third site here was interesting because the shopkeepers and the traders union was very clear that they do not want to approach the courts for the same, because they had a distrust towards the courts and what would lead, because they had seen the example of the slum area and the dispossession that happened. So instead of that, their approach and their pressure group, their lobbying has been with the political leaders, as a lot of them have also been Karyakarta for the ruling party and the municipalities within the city. So lastly, I also like this is also like a building analysis that I am putting forward here. So it's because as a working paper, but also I think first thing that happens here, because of the politicization, the lack of participatory governance that has been there within the smart cities, the technological model of it is not it does not, like, the smart cities might be planned that way, but also the conclusion of it does not just become technocratic. Instead, through these sites of resistance that I see, there have been newer avenues of how the city is being planned that have shaped up over the last many years. And also, when there has not been any formal structure to approach or to understand how these routes are being taken, they definitely go within their own graded inequalities within these sites, that we see that a site which is able to lobby with political representatives or has already sustained power within the structures is able to lobby much better, and whereas reaching out to the legal resource has often been tricky, or even often discouraged another group to take the same route. And because of that, the grade inequalities are often then more exacerbated in the same planning that was going forward. The third thing is also how the semantics around the resistance or the use of language has been.
Kalki, I'm sorry, I have to ask you to stop because we really run over time, and maybe we can pick these up when we come back to questions. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
I'll stop sharing.
All right. We'll now move on to the third presentation, which is in person here. The third one is titled "Planning as Currency: Defection, Coalition, and the Making of Space in Goa." We have Tahir with us, who will present on behalf of his whole team.
Presenting on behalf of a group of us who work in Goa. Thanks. I'm going to talk. Mike, louder. Yeah. I'm going to talk about an issue I'm sure will resonate with many in this room, considering we're in a city that doesn't have an elected Mahanagar Palike. And we do this presentation to provoke you and show you similar acts of state government dominating over local government, and mainly to provoke where planning could fit in such a political system using years of data that we've collected in Goa. So here's how my presentation will go. I'll first introduce Goa. Where's the ticker? Yeah. I'll first introduce Goa and the research question. I'll get into literature, our methods. Then I'll tell you all a small story about political coalitions before settling down in what we are starting to theorize as planning as currency. And so this is Goa. Many of you all may be familiar with it. It's my homeland. All four of us have roots here going back at least 300 to 500 years. It's India's smallest and highest educated state. We have 197 local governments. 189 of these are villages. These villages collectively govern a population of only around 16 lakhs, sorry. When planning is at a crisis, it's super important for all of us to consider what happens when MLAs seize control of our planning institutions. Goa's notorious for bebes, jumping frog politicians who frequently switch allegiances. From 1990s to today, the political economy of this tiny state is centered around defection. We're sitting in Karnataka, we've seen this too, but in Goa, it happens regularly. Trust me, every election, you'll have some guy jumping over to the other party. And defection, what is defection? It's broadly politicians who switch party allegiance or vote against the party line. Such behavior can have significant effect on legislative majorities, government stability. It happens everywhere. It's part of a political system to react to voters and donors' demands. So, why defect? Political theory talks about four hypotheses: weak party systems, rent seeking behavior by a political class who's looking to get richer, value conflicts between politicians and the people who elect them, and networks of influence, which we call whispers in the halls of power, and the interpersonal dynamics between politicians within and across party lines. So here's the big question that's in your mind right now. Why should we as urban researchers care? We argue that the ability to plan, and when we say this, we mean regulating development, supplying infrastructure, assembling land together, and using the heavy hand of the law on informal construction to punish them, are a major faction behind political defection, at least in Goa and perhaps in India. Researchers are beginning to connect this construction and political defection together. Devesh Kapoor and Milan Vaishnav have done crazy work looking at how before the Delhi election, cement sales went down. The real estate politician is a term coined by two Bangaloreans, Narendra Pani and my advisor, Sai Balakrishnan. It's an increasingly common figure. All of y'all... Oh, sorry. I'm still on the Kapoor piece. Oh, yes. A lot of y'all know the man at the third man at the bottom there. Can we ever talk about real estate in Bangalore without DK Shivkumar? The other man on the bottom is Maharashtra Tourism Minister Mangal Lodha, also incredibly wealthy, powerful state political actor. We know the two real estate politicians on top. Everybody knows these two men. But real estate politicians are rising in the world right now. So more broadly, these theories also connect to planning and the politics. The growth machine theory, as well as its global south reformulations by Heller, Mukhopadhyay as the growth cabal, Gavin Shatkin and Sai Balakrishnan's work on land monetization, but also literature on special governments, parastatal governments, smart cities, planning and development authorities, which at their core are instruments for political bypassing. Why see defections in Goa? I feel local journalists have a finger on the pulse. Much of the reporting on defections in Goa always calls them rewards. This made us curious. So we ask, when planning is traded to secure coalitions, how is the political economy remade and to whose advantage? So we set out to figure out the state's dynamics. We mapped every political government formed. Rarely, if you see, can any single party get to the halfway mark and get enough MLAs to form a government. It's always cobbling together coalitions of small regional parties to reach the magic number of 21. Our methods for this paper, we use qualitative methods, mostly archival research of newspapers, court proceedings, government diaries, and gazettes. When trying to trace some of these institutional positions, data was difficult, offices scattered across the state. And then I found this. There's a diary given to every MLA, and that diary has every person who holds every government position, even the small ones like Horticulture Corporation, etc. It was a gold mine. And then we supplement this with semi-structured interviews with 4 current MLAs. Frankly, these were the only 4 people who were ready to talk to us on this study. We are all really invested in this. We're all really invested in this issue. We've grown up in Goa. We do public interest litigation courses for people in Goa. We work with a lot of NGOs. But so we are also bringing our embedded ethnography into this. So now let me tell you my story of defections. In 2017, nobody made a majority, typical of Goa. Congress got 20 seats though, one short. But the BJP, together with Vijay Sardesai and Sudin, 2 local party leaders on top over there, cobbled together an alliance of all the regional parties. It became 20 Congress versus 20 everyone else. On the day of the floor test, one congressman, the man in red, Vishwajit Rane, did not come to assembly. So in a diminished house of 39, they needed 20. BJP plus independents had 20. They won. Half a year later, Rane resigned from the Congress along with two other congressmen. They recontested elections. They won. In 2019, Babu Kavlekar, leader of opposition, engineered a wholesale defection of the Congress. 12 out of the remaining 17 left the Congress, joined the BJP, and Vijay and Sudhin, poor fellows, got ditched. Oh, sorry, I missed one. Yeah. And then at the 2022 general election, out of 15 defectors, 11 lost. Some of them lost their deposits, including Babu, who engineered the last defection. But in 2022, the same story again. Vishwajit this time built a coalition of independents to get to a magic number of 21. And then within 9 months, he engineered another defection of the Congress. So after this history lecture, you're thinking this is like a psephologist analysis. How is it a planning issue? Well, remember, in Goa, since 2017, construction license fees have not increased per square meter. However, the amount of revenue collected from construction license, and they'll not tell me, I've asked through various ways, they'll never tell us how much of construction licenses have been issued, but we can see from the budget how much of money they've made from construction license. So we know that there is a clear change in the amount of construction since defections have happened. Similarly, Kishore Naik Gaonkar, an independent journalist, has traced around 30% of the white money donations to political parties to real estate firms. And this is a forthcoming paper of mine that looks at the assets of the sitting legislatures, and we find that 26 out of the 40 have white money investments in real estate. We went further back. The 1990s were an incredibly turbulent time for Goa. You had 16 governments between 1990 and 2002. The state government used to allow special purpose rezoning, zone change, conversions of land for tourism and residential projects. Governments came and fell. Every one of those blue lines of government falling, the amount of land getting converted never changes. It stopped when the court found it unconstitutional in 2005. So here's how the currency actually begins to operate. First, there's a state minister for town planning. Interviewees called it the most lucrative portfolio. And if you see, there's a trend. Every minister who's seen to have orchestrated the defection gets rewarded with the TCP ministry. And that's because he has two powers. First, he can remake the planning law, creating new statutes to allow you to convert land. And secondly, he can appoint people to planning and development authorities that govern municipal areas. In 2007, Digambar Kamath, ex-defector from the BJP, joined the Congress, became the town planning minister, said municipalities don't have to conform to a regional plan. Divvied up those municipalities, planning and development authorities to his defection partners. We can have only 12 cabinet ministers, so they created a new thing called the Goa Investment Promotion Board in 2017. This allows the industries minister now to create mini special economic zones and do planning in other parts of the state. Now, both town planning, PDA, industries can all have zoning powers across the state. Again, defectors accommodated everywhere. Literally this July, the tourism department gave itself the power to convert land for coastal tourism. So now the coastal villages and cities are also under yet another state ministry. In parallel, and for lack of time, I won't talk about this, but even our infrastructure provisions have been completely parastatalized. We have the Goa Public Works Department, the Goa State Infrastructure Development Corporation, Tourism Development Corporation, Sewer and Infrastructure Development Corporation. They do the same things. They float the same tenders for sewer lines, road repairs. So, but each one has a head who is an MLA who is not part of this 12-member cabinet. And most of them are defectors. This has led to our theory of Goa being the most parastatalized state in the country. It's still a work in progress. We need to go through this in more detail. But our initial state data says we have more special governments per million than any other state in the country. And so, two of us, Solano and I, tried to be academics, coin a terminology for what we just showed you, something that builds on this work of land monetization that we come from, and we're calling it planning as currency. Mainstream planning literature usually puts politicians as oppositions, but we say that politicians are not sidelining planning. They are using planning for their quest for votes and self enrichment. It is their main objective. They want to plan really, really, really badly. We always say they try and stop us for planning. No, that is at least what we try see in Goa. They love planning. And because this is evolving, we're trying to break down the ingredients for this. So we argue similar to how a monetary system needs sovereign guarantees, planning as currency needs some sovereign guarantees. And what we think maybe this framework could apply to looking at planning as currency in other cities and states as well. You need a democratic framework where office is contested and engaged. You need scarcity of land of some sort, at least in the urban areas, peri-urban areas, where monetization can fix large amounts of capital. You need a political class that are themselves landowners, and you need a legal system that prompts this. So, to conclude, the Goa state shows us that by treating planning as currency, political parties stabilize coalitions, reward defections, and monetize land at great cost to long term equity goals. For urban theory, this requires a rethinking of the assumption that politics and planning operate oppositional or separate spheres. In context where land is scarce, parties fragmented, and politicians themselves landowners, planning is politics. It is about time we planners get involved in the political sphere, confront this emerging reality, and perhaps stop painting ourselves as victims of a system we cannot control. People in my state are trying to do this. I could not be more proud. Gaon Karano, Zayed Zage, Zayed Zage. Dev Barak.
Thanks, Tahir. Moving on to the fourth presentation. This is called Living Through the Negotiation of Contested Territories, a study of the Bharwad pastoral community in Gujarat. We have Manali with us.
Yeah, my co-presenter must be online. Yeah. Brinda is traveling actually, so she will join online. Right. So, in context of contested terrains, we aim to discuss very subtle continuities and discontinuities of cultural landscape flowing across man-made territories. And we will discuss this through our ongoing research project, which is a study of Bharwad, a pastoralist community in Gujarat, funded by INTAC. The traditional living pattern of this community, it basically revolves around moving with their herds, following grazing areas across different geographical regions. Nature, habitat, um, the ways of living, culture, everything is seen in sync. Everything is seen holistically. So there is no differentiation ever drawn. Therefore, even though life actually unfolds within continuously contested social, economic, ecological, political territories, the manifestations are seen through meaningful negotiations. Yeah. Um, so, in a way, we can say that the dwelling of Bharwad community can be seen as sites that narrate stories of contestations and their harmonious negotiations. These dwellings are primarily formed through the community's understanding of their own environment, ecology, cultural relations. But then, secondly, they are placed in different territories and built through certain negotiations. So, the spatial organization remains the same because it is derived through man man and man animal relationships. But the formation of dwelling, the form and the location, it changes based on the negotiation at each place. So, for example, this is a native dwelling in their settlement. Um, here the contestations are least. Basically, the community forms its own clusters in the village. Majority times it is on the periphery of the village because they can access the agricultural and grazing lands easily, while easily supporting the settlement community with milk and manure. They form these clusters based on their functional and cultural requirement, and the entire community comes together, so their religious aspects and everything is taken care of. So in these least sort of contestations, the dwelling form is seen as the most elaborate. So as we can see, how do I the pointer? Oh, it doesn't. Okay, no problem. So as you can see, there are clearly built spaces there where you can see the rooms, which are sleeping areas and storage areas. Then you can see these semi public sort of osri space where daily activities happen, guests are received. Kitchen is deliberately planned separately, although it is a part of this daily activity area, the semi open area. The forecourt is a very important place because this is where unknown guests are invited, and this is where all the activities with animals take place. Animal shelters are built separately. So this is the typical dwelling form. Now if three families come together and build a dwelling, the same unit gets repeated, as you can see in the right diagram. And once it gets repeated, the distances and the scales of open spaces are very carefully worked out so that privacy and shared spaces are both taken care of and are under control. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Now, when, for example, a family has a larger number of animals and they can't fit in a single dwelling, they build another dwelling. They build the shelter outside the dwelling. Similarly, fodder storage, dung storage, everything happens in common areas, like how you see in the cluster plan. There are in between common grounds provided where the community uses it for fodder storage. It is often shared by many households. So the entire notion of dwelling extends beyond a built structure. It extends with the activities, and it never is defined in a certain box. Also, the activity extends in the grazing areas. So, the grazing routes are generally defined, but they also change in correspondence with the seasonal cycles, agricultural cycles. So, when they start moving out, that becomes their sense of place, their sense of belonging. Each person has a demarcated area where they take their cows and buffaloes for grazing. So basically the dwelling and its notion, the perception keeps extending. But uh, uh, when the seasonal cycle of migration starts, people start traveling to longer distances, and that's when they start making dwellings, temporary dwellings along the way. Sorry. So, yeah. So what we can say is that in Bharwad dwelling, space is not perceived as static landscape, but a dynamic field of relationships between people, animals, and environment, constantly redefined through movement and practice. This dwelling where they make it, basically it crosses geographical and regional boundaries. So it is, of course, it is made on contested territories, and how they have to make is through different kind of negotiations. These negotiations happen either through social and economic give and take, or it happens through human relations, ancestral ties, community bonds. So here, for example, if you can see this yellow zone marked, this is where a family has formed a temporary dwelling. The settlement is slightly further away, and it is deliberately placed at a certain distance because that distance allows them to have that sort of negotiation. They are not a part of the settlement, but they are not also not a part of the settlement. They can easily deal with the farmers, they can easily sell their milk there. So the distance allow them the separation, but the proximity allows them to become a part of this social and economic exchange. Similarly, often they are invited to stay in fields, agricultural fields. So the post harvest residues become fodder for the animal, and manure enrich their soil. They also occupy places near religious institution because that makes them penetrate the social circle easily, so they become socially accepted. They also occupy places which are near communal water spots because a large number of animals need water, and this happens through political mediation, ensuring that they will vote for the politician. um, s- yeah, sorry. The nature of the dwelling, of course, changes. Here, it is either partially built or completely unbuilt. It is built on barren lands, generally shaded and protected through fencing. Basically, this is a dwelling of three families traveling together. And what is interesting to see is that the entire spatial organization remains the same as their native dwelling. So the sleeping areas are separate, and they are more privately created. Kitchen is also put right next to the semi public area. Each person has different places for their animals, and the distance between two family clusters, basically that defines the privacy level. So what we see here is that the built structure becomes obsolete. Basically, the entire perception of dwelling exists without built structure. The space making happens without any sort of demarcation. So boundaries are drawn, but without drawing boundaries. So for the Bharwad, dwelling is not merely a physical construct, but a continuum of lived rituals recreated across locations. It's a place where that daily rituals are manifested, and manifested in the very same manner as they are performed in the native settlement. So in a way, the entire notion of dwelling is contested by its very nature of making. So although in each place the dwellings are made on socially, ecologically, politically contested boundaries, these boundaries are not hard drawn. They are always negotiated. They are negotiated through social and economic equations, at times political too. So it is this human relations that blur the boundary. And if we can also say that the Bharwa dwellings can be seen as sites where the contestations blur. Sorry. So I'll go back just once. Yeah. So basically, what we take from here is that a equation of human relation basically allows certain contestations to blur and coexistence to happen in harmony, which is very, very important here, and which we are losing when we come to the urban scenario. So, the symbiotic relationship actually allows a certain ecosystem to work. It allows the community to take place in different ecosystem and support them. And not happening. Yeah, thanks. So when they come to urban areas, what happens is that the contestations are played out on internal as well as external levels, producing completely different issues. It produces competing notions of territory, belonging, and identity. So here too, the community tries to secure a sense of place by grouping of the clan. So they try to again form a cluster of the community, and they try to occupy the land which is outside the urban area, although that land doesn't have access, can be flooded, anything. But once again, the sense of security comes from community bonding. The yeah uh, the territories are again marked in the same way. Just a minute, huh? The territories are again marked in the same way, but the boundaries are very, very harsh now. On the right is the urban dwelling of a family, and on the left is the same family's dwelling in rural area. So, despite these transformations, the manifestations of cultural living patterns and social relations remain similar. The ways of engaging with landscape and maintaining social ties persist, and the social networks continue to blur the contested territories. As the social network expands, the contestations blur even further. So basically, we conclude here with our reading that these kind of blurring of contestation was a very important part of our culture. It was a very valuable way of life that was sustained social, economic, and ecological balance across multiple ecosystems. And if we just widen our lens, this is what we were thinking actually, and this is what we want to leave you with, that maybe such harmonious negotiations are deeply embedded in the Indian way of living. Our traditional cultural thinking resisted the idea of strict boundaries and rigidly defined spaces, and instead viewed relationships between people, spaces, and nature as dynamic, fluid, and continuously evolving. Such dynamism and flexibility have historically enabled multiplicity, complexity, richness, and sustainability to flourish within the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Manali. Moving on, the fifth presentation, sorry, yeah. The fifth presentation for the panel is A Tale of Two Refusals, Centering Refusal in Urban Development Agendas of Bangalore by Ranjana and Ranjini, both of who are here.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. Hi, thank you all for being here. We're presenting from an ongoing project, so we're not entirely done with fieldwork. And this is a collaboration between me, Ranjana, and my background is in anthropology, and Ranjani, who's an urban planner. My larger research interests are in writing and documenting ethno-histories of different neighborhoods in Bangalore. And Ranjani's interests are in imagination. And we found this sort of brief collaboration to map one site in North Bangalore in its process of transition. It's also Ranjani's PhD project, so maybe you want to say something, a line about it.
Yeah, I think I'd like to put my relationship with research up front, which is that this place of research is not just a study area for me, it's also home. I live here, and therefore it is both personal and a space where I'm negotiating with my own neighbors, my own friends. So it's a long term relationship that we are bringing here.
All right, we'll just read from the paper. Urbanization, especially in the global south, often unfolds through contests among diverse social actors and institutions. And like many papers this morning, and many scholars who continue to draw from Lefebvre's ideas of right to the city, scholars have also emphasized that urban space is certainly not neutral, but is socially produced through struggles over land, resources, identity, and power. In India, these contests are largely structured by the state's machinery of policymaking, planning, and development, also entangled with private lobbies and legal frameworks. While urban conflicts over space, governance, and justice are common features of a city, they often occur within strictly defined state frameworks that are driven by commercial as well as top down agendas, displacing marginalized communities. Beneath these dissonant urban forms lies a deeper struggle, a clash of systems, worldviews, and imaginations about the relationships between self, community, land, and habitation. Our research is located in the northern periphery of Bangalore city, the most recent hotbed for urbanization. The beacon of the Bangalore International Airport, which opened its operations in 2008, has led the city to develop northwards, with the development authorities notifying new urban residential project in December 2008. These signals have resulted in speculation and planning for private residential, industrial, and institutional development, as well as large scale infrastructure development projects. Land consolidation and acquisition by large and small real estate and speculative investors have been steadily and quietly on the rise. This spatial expansion, and not unlike other parts of the city, has resulted in the absorption of agricultural lands and villages. While the role of subnational state actors in urbanization has been well documented in other parts of India, scholars have also emphasized the need to explore local forms of agency and vernacular modes of contestations. So, how do processes of urbanization acquire new dynamics that demand new modes of engagement when acquisition and redevelopment are led by the state?
We situate our inquiry in one of the key sites of development, which is at the intersection of a highway project the, alongside a large public sector government led residential layout development. The research site in North Bangalore is currently in a state of transition, with village lands acquired and reformed into plots, awaiting the arrival of a new wave of residents from other parts of the state and the country. These deliberate ecological, economic, and socio-cultural changes and churn in the landscape have not only resulted in contestations over land acquisition, fair compensation, and ecological challenges, but also a deep sense of uncertainty among inhabitants caught in the throes of global aspirations in these local contexts. The power wielded by the state to lead such development comes into contestation when people mobilize around ideas of democratic representation, nativity, fairness, and consent. This paper draws from a research collaboration between the authors, which adopts ethnographic and community based methodologies to trace the process of change in the selected site of transition. Through 6 months of fieldwork and conversations with residents, we have witnessed how questions about land, labor, and livelihoods are entangled with urban development agendas and aspirations. In this paper, we focus on interviews with two farmers, Shiva and Mahesh, pseudonyms, who had spent years resisting urban transformations on their lands, 18 years, in fact. The farmers are at the precipice of this transition and embody the grief of loss of a way of life, of their land and their livelihoods. and the uncertainty of what the future holds for them and their families. At the end of this 18-year battle to preserve the land and their relationships, they feel defeated. At the same time, both the fight for survival and the aftermath of loss are marked by a refusal to believe the narratives of development and promises of the urban way of life that is being sold to them. While the conflict took many forms, from denial to subversive reclamation to outright people's protest and legal contestation, all the way to the Supreme Court, the final frontier of contestation now is a form of refusal. Therefore, in this paper, we highlight this refusal of urban development agendas as a mode of inhabiting both hope and the inevitability of transitions.
Shiva and Mahesh consider themselves natives of the villages that were acquired by the state for the massive development project. Shiva holds a master's degree and had plans to incorporate a small farm stay business while continuing farming in his family land. That was until larger ideas of development swallowed his small aspirations. As we walked with him on the freshly laid roads dotting the barren remains of what was once his family's farming land, he spoke fondly about how his cows used to graze freely. Now, only 5 cows remain with him. He has stopped supplying milk to the nearby dairy, which also eventually shut down. He waits without livelihood or employment for the outcomes of land allocation after the acquisition to make further plans. He had joined other farmers to protest the forceful acquisition, but eventually lands and houses were bulldozed. Their protests were also silenced. As we walked on, he remarked, "In the end, only farmers die." Mahesh is a native of a nearby village. He inherited his family's agricultural land and was preserved by his grandfather. When the announcement for development was made, many farmers were alarmed. Mahesh joined other farmers and protested the acquisition of agricultural land. The High Court ruled in favor of the farmers, but the judgment was eventually overturned in the Supreme Court of India. Having spent all his savings on legal resources, Mahesh also feels defeated. Mahesh's attachment to his land was beyond inheritance of livelihood, but was also one of ancestral life and prana. Mahesh added, "No farmer has hit the stomach of another. It's only the educated Indians who do." Both Shiva and Mahesh, despite their defeat in community mobilization and legal proceedings, spoke with clarity against the ideologies of urban development and how the farmers are dispossessed for making way for others' urban aspirations. They mourned the loss of ancient cultural wisdom, indigenous farming practices, and the pain of uprooting communities from food production and turning them into consumers of urban agendas. They also mourn the loss of communities of sharing, practices of care, and a sense of belonging in place. Today, they also accept the inevitability of these processes, but refuse to accept that as a better way of life. Their refusal is an ideological one, which they inhabit in this liminal space of transition between the death of villages, making room for new urban imaginations to come. While the overt forms of their contestations appear to be defeated by the inevitability of urban expansion, their refusal also holds the hope for alternative imaginations and possible narratives.
Across disciplines, refusal is understood as more than negation. It is a social and political act that can redefine relationships, boundaries, and possibilities. Carol McGranen frames it as a deliberate strategic gesture that both rejects subjugation and asserts alternative social relationships. It reveals the tension between being shaped by institutions and retaining the capacity to say no without fully formed alternatives. The farmers' oppositions embodied this stance by using the mechanisms of the state itself to claim their democratic space and refuse a particular model of development. Marcuse's idea of the Great Refusal signals a radical rejection of dominant capitalist structures in North Bangalore. This spirit informed the farmers' organized resistance to land acquisition and was shaped by the memories of other development projects where absence of collective action led to loss. This leaves us to wonder, what is refusal in inevitable defeat? In political theory, refusal is seen as oppositional yet generative, what Olufemi calls affirmative refusal, where saying no becomes an act of collective political experimentation. It becomes an exercise in imagination towards world building and creating new solidarities, and an exercise in memory, in refusing to forget the lived realities of a known way of life. Through the journey of the two farmers, we frame refusal as generative, involving the rejection of aspects of the status quo while potentially opening paths towards new communal, ethical, or political arrangements. The politics of refusal is often marked by ambiguity. It might not contain a fully articulated alternative, but it expresses a critical stance towards existing social realities and a hope for another way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjana and Ranjani. Now we head to the last presentation of this panel. It's called Seeing Like a Local Citizen Science as Method for Understanding Contested Public Space. And Kiran is going to present it for us.
Yeah. So I'll get start. Sorry. Yeah. So we at the Everyday City Lab, we work on primarily on public spaces and informal public spaces. So that includes streets as far as our work is concerned. And in the context of Indian cities, we have been seeing street and public space design as being a wicked problem. I've also included the definition just to sort of remind ourselves what a wicked problem really is. It has a very high level of complexity. And the reason for this complexity is that these are spaces that are constantly negotiated and reshaped on an everyday basis. Sorry. Also, the other reason that they become wicked problems are because there are interdependencies between the vast number of stakeholder groups that there are. So this creates a gap between how public spaces are designed and how they are actually inhabited, producing this contested terrain. And in this paper, I would like to share some work that we have been doing that we did over a period of about 2 years. We were developing a online data repository known as Decoding Every Day. This was the very young team that was working on it. It included Eklavya, Dibyashekhar, Aparna, and Vidisha. And I continue to be very grateful to them because they really put in hours and hours of work. If you look at the portal, it looks very simplistic. It's decodingeveryday.com, a very simple looking portal, but they really put in a lot of work because a lot of the skills that we needed, we didn't really have. And they were sort of learning as we went along. They are all urban design students and graduates. This is what the landing page looks like. So the idea of the portal was to gather neighborhood stories with the help of citizens. So we would invite citizens to contribute. And the idea was that the master plan, which is a 5-year plan, is also drawn at a scale of 1:10,000. And what we really need to understand the contestation at the ground is basically a street level plan, something that would give you the street level informality. And the only way we thought that was possible was if we engage citizens, because we felt that even the government machinery was not good enough, large enough to sort of document changes that were happening on a daily basis. So what it shows you are the different formats on the landing page, how you can contribute. And I'm going to play a very short clip from a film that we made. This was made about 1 year into the portal. It was more for outreach, for explaining to people what this was about.
Decoding Everyday is a participatory tool for issues related to public spaces. How can we be of value to you? We have data in multiple formats that can help make streets and public spaces better. The citizen contributions received on the portal are visual evidence of the conditions of the streets and public spaces of various neighborhoods. All the data that we have received has been collated city-wise on the Find and Know Your City section. We started with these 4 cities for which we received the highest number of contributions. We can receive contributions and collate data for your city as well. For instance, if you click on Ahmedabad, you can find all the data from the city in different formats. This section comprising the city-wise database can help in spatially mapping the data received for a comprehensive understanding at both the neighborhood scale and the city scale. The Everyday Stories section captures experiences in the form of videos. Like this video demonstrates how a small activity can transform the nature and perception of a space, making it safer and usable. The City Remembered is a section that includes oral histories given by people from different backgrounds. The first series conducted with grandparents reflected on how the public life has transformed over the years. The second series conducted with women covered their preference of spaces and criteria for sense of safety in public spaces. Our forthcoming series covers the themes of children in public spaces and pandemic and public spaces. The discussion forum section is a platform for citizens to voice their observations and understandings of their neighborhoods.
As you can, we titled the paper Seeing Like a Local, borrowing from James Scott's work on Seeing Like a State. While I say it proposes the inverse, actually the premise is the same. It's just that in the title we changed the state to local, but the premise is exactly what Scott talks about in his work. We believe that the state typically, through its abstraction and through creating maps in a certain way, or through not acknowledging the complexity of a city, it tries to simplify everything in order to make it easier to govern cities. But this really wipes out everything that our habitats are made of, and our cities are made of. So in Decoding Everyday, we are trying to actually look at things quite in the way that Scott proposed we should look at. And in terms of the methodological framework, while we are using citizen science in urban design and planning has not been used very much. So we were ourselves borrowing from citizen science projects such as eBird, which was developed by Cornell's ornithology lab, and several other citizen science projects that are quite popular in environmental sciences. So in trying to sort of bring that into urban design work within that larger citizen science methodology, we have used 4 different sort of sub methods, you might call them. So one is participatory spatial mapping, where we were reaching out to people through announcing competitions. And each of these themes that you see, I mean, for each of them, as we announced, we would put out a very thoughtfully curated note, almost directing people to submit and to start to see their neighborhoods under that particular lens, just so that we would have collective knowledge on a particular theme across neighborhoods and across different perspectives. The second one was this microethnographic visual documentation, which is used quite commonly, by both by architects, urban designers, and planners. This was through our everyday stories section, where you could upload a 1-minute film. And of course, at that time, we were imagining that at some point, we wouldn't necessarily just have people from an urban design background or the urban educated who would contribute. But if we were able to go offline and conduct workshops on the ground, that we might even, be able to encourage street vendors to upload these kind of 1-minute videos. We didn't get to that point, but those were some of our aspirations. And of course, the oral histories and memory based narratives, which fell under the City Remembered section, which we saw in the film. I'd like to play a short audio from our Ask Your Grandparents series. Very interesting. As we spoke to older people, we were discovering a little bit more about their perception of public space. I'll just quickly play one. It's in Hindi, so I'll do a bit of translation after that.
स्कूल में लाइब्रेरियन थे। अच्छा नानी, तो अभी हमको जानना है कि आपके आसपास जब आप बाहर जाते थे ही बाहर समय बिताने के लिए, अभी तो पैंडेमिक हो गया तो वो तो अलग बात है, लेकिन जब जाते थे तो आप कहाँ जाते थे? वो कोई पार्क, गार्डन या किसी के साथ गोष्ठी करने के लिए वो कहाँ जाते थे आप? हम क्या निगम पार्क। निगम पार्क में हम लोग जाते थे कभी कभी, जैसे हमको घूमने के लिए बोला है डॉक्टर बोलते थे, तो हम जब जाते थे मंदिर से घूम के आते थे, मंदिर से फिर इधर घूम के पूरा कॉलोनी का चक्कर लगाते थे। उसी में निगम पार्क एक था। हम लोग के नजदीक में भी पार्क है, चिल्ड्रन पार्क। वहां भी कभी जाके बैठे, 2-4 लेडीज मिले तो बातचीत किए अपना, फिर लौट आए। आधा घंटा 1 घंटा घूमते थे।
Of course, this, it's a much longer interview. And if you go to the City Remembered section on this decoding portal, you'll find a lot of things have been uploaded. Everything is available in the public domain. And we are hoping that urban researchers can access some of this data and use it in different ways. We were also using reflexive data feedback loops, which were basically these data bulletins. We were bringing them out once in 2 weeks under different themes. So as far as the process was concerned, we had to make certain choices. One of the choices was to share our own data from prior research work. We felt that we couldn't ask citizens to contribute unless we were putting something out from our own research work. So we had put out this work on tree shrine spaces that we have been doing on for a long time. Some of it was already out there, but we put even more of it out there. And the phases of building, of course, there was lots going on at the back end, as I said. We had to use several methods of outreach. We were using Instagram, Facebook, emailers, posters along streets. There were several challenges that we faced, but the biggest one was getting citizens to contribute. And we were constantly also documenting how we were going about it. Sustaining engagement over time was the other challenge. We were monitoring the traffic on the portal. With every competition, we were keeping a count on the contributions, the visitors, the cities reached, the countries reached, and so on. And in terms of validating the data, it was something that we were being questioned about a lot, because we had reached out to RWAs and municipalities and NGOs and urban researchers, asking them if they would use the portal. And of course, we were being asked how good was the data. Now, we ourselves did not eventually go out and finish all of this validation, but what we learned was that there were ways in which it could be done. So we felt that you could compare citizen reported data with sensor data. and also work with participants to refine what would count as a valid observation. And I'll just conclude here. These are our key contributions. Through this, it was about shifting scale from master plan to neighborhood. It was about democratizing expertise, enabling citizens to gather and interpret spatial data. And finally, bridging digital and on-ground civic action. So I'll stop with this, hoping that, through this paper, we can contribute a grounded approach to understanding contestation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiran, and thank you to all the presenters. We have very little time for questions, so I want to ask the organizing team, can we take another 10 minutes into the break? 5 minutes, okay. So this is how we're going to do it. Let's open it out to the audience, and I have some questions as well. Let's go speaker to speaker. So let's start with maybe the last one who presented. Any questions for Kiran from the audience? We'll go through a round of questions and then we'll get to responses. So I do have a question for you, Kiran. Your project was really exciting, and I'd like to chat more with you about, how you operationalized it and the other challenges. But my question is, has this project sort of built the capacity of people who are contributing data to sort of collectively articulate what do they demand from their neighborhood? What are their demands for the neighborhood? Are there any gaps? Were they able to sort of see map what they were seeing, but also see what are the gaps, and did it sort of in any way build capacity to ask for what was missing? And also then in that act, reclaim planning as a public act, really. Did that do, did this project enable that in any way? So I want you to sit with the question. We'll come back to the responses. You can take a little time to think about it. But we'll move on to Ranjana and Ranjani's presentation. Any questions for Ranjana and Ranjani from the audience? I hope you'll have been writing down your questions if you'll had any. Any questions for Ranjana and Ranjani? I have something though. And again, thank you so much for that work, because it's also kind of close to me because I live in that area as well. So, yeah. So my question was, you introduced this term to us, affirmative refusal, right? So I'm wondering, and you may have heard many more stories of this kind of a refusal to and a refusal to accept the changes that's happening around them. So does this sort of give us a new form of collective solidarity and offer a new pathway to imagine spatial justice? Does affirmative refusal give us a way of collectivizing and a pathway to social justice, especially in the context of not having an alternative plan, at least articulated alternative plan? So in such a context, what does refusal do beyond not being able to accept? So that's my question for you all. The third presentation was Tahir's presentation, which is very exciting. Thank you for that. Folks, any questions for Tahir? Neha.
No, I actually had a question for Tahir. It was really kind of fascinating to see the parastatal kind of conversion that's happened in Goa. Could you talk a little bit more about one where it sits in sort of this history of Goa's kind of older forms, especially given like the colonial history of Goa's kind of very localized municipal, forms of governance that existed, and how this kind of sits alongside with that a little bit, and sort of what, if at all there's any future of sort of some of that coming back in some ways.
Why don't we take the responses to these questions and then move over to the other speakers? So, Kiran, do you want to respond?
So in terms of were people able to articulate and put some of their concerns across, I think we also had this page called the discussion forum, and we found that for a lot of people, they were very happy to put up a post there, and some of the posts were really lengthy ones where sometimes they didn't agree with the whole idea of the portal, or they felt that this online mode, how much could it possibly do, and should we not really be on the ground. Sometimes it was their own learnings, and they were just wanting to share that. So it was not about capturing data, but it was about their own reflections over the years, and they were sort of in sync with what was happening, but what we were in the sense that the intent was the same, and they wanted to share alternative ways of doing something. Also, what we started to realize was that with these thematic competitions, we were receiving entries, but we didn't know where they were coming from, who were the people behind them. So what we started to do at some point was we reached out again to these to the prize winners. So we had a prize, and we would reach out. We had like 3 prize winners for each competition. So we would reach out to them and we would ask if we can do an interview with them. That initially was just a way of getting to know them. But once we did the interviews, we realized that there was so much in that conversation that came out, that we took their consent to then put the interviews back onto the portal. So now you can also see under each of those. So I think we were kind of going towards it, but not enough of
Okay.
what could have happened perhaps.
Okay. Thank you. Ranjana and Ranjini.
Yeah, your question was, does affirmative refusal give us new ways to collectivize, and what does it do in such a situation? I think what we are seeing is the need to sit with refusal and not immediately demand another alternative and ask, Acha, if this is not good enough for you, then what do you want? I don't know, but I don't know, but I know that this is not what I want. If we use that refusal as a starting point rather than giving one option, this or nothing, I think it speaks to us as planners and urban practitioners as a point of entry to think of alternatives. So when we hear a no, then how do we go back to the drawing board and listen to that no and then say, why is this no coming? And how can we use that as a starting point? Okay, if this is disrupting a way of life, then can that way of life be incorporated into our urban proposals? So I think affirmative refusal from the point of view of the inhabitants who don't have the power as planners or practitioners is more of a prod for us to take action. And I think we look at it as a sort of instigation.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. It's very nuanced, but many people may not know this. Pre-independence, that is pre-61, Goa state had only 3 ministries. You had the Ministry of Interior, which looked after health, safety, law and order; Ministry of Exterior, which looked at relations with India; and Ministry of Public Works. And everything was handled by what are now the 9 talukas, which were called the conselios. They would elect local government. They were incredibly strong local governments, which had the powers of planning, which had the powers of infrastructure provision. They could commission the obras publicas with their own revenue to do anything within them. So we, in some way, we think it's very interesting that from a state that, and prior to Conselios, we have also very independent village communities called the Gaunkaris, where each village managed sharecropped, managed its own produce, sold that out. Only every resident of the village got a share of the crop. And so we're going from this really strong local government institution to now a really strong state government institution. And this is something that drives me through my PhD also, is how have we shifted within just the span of 60 years from perhaps the strongest local governments in India to the strongest state government in India.
Thank you. We'll open up questions for Manali, who spoke about the Bharwad pastoral community in Gujarat. Any questions for her from the audience? Yeah, please.
I mean, you spoke about this. Thank you. So I find it very interesting that you spoke about the groups, places, and how that could be manifested today, how we could learn from it. I mean, I was just finding most of your thoughts are in like now the urbanization and the density. It made me think of more housing projects like collaborative housing projects, in which they now are experimenting with having a apartment stock and based on the needs. So family, a single person has a small apartment. If they get married, they get a two-room. If they have a family, they get bigger. And then when the children leave, again, they have to move into a smaller one. This is a kind of an idea that I had, but it still has a fixed scope. So how you would implement it, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I think there's also another question here.
Hi, thanks everyone on the panel for the wonderful session. This question is quite simple, really. I noticed that you were using the word dwelling. And for me, what seemed like they were doing was a lot of homemaking practices. So I wanted to know why was the word dwelling used instead of home? Did it come from the community? Was it the source word? Just wanted to know a little more about that.
Okay, we'll take questions for the presentation by Kalki, contesting the smart city. The context was in Bhopal. Any questions for her from the audience? I did have a. Okay, great.
Hello. So you talked a little bit about smart cities in terms of the spectacle and their visibility, and I was wondering how that visibility or hypervisibility affects the ability of people to resist that type of change, whether that it increases that or decreases it or doesn't have an effect, how you see that.
Okay, for the paucity of time, I'll just skip my question. And this is a question for the last person, the first person on the panel, really, which was Mumbai's public open spaces, access, conflict, and stewardship. Anybody wants to ask a question from the audience for that one? Well, let me ask my question. So you presented many examples of, collective stewardship, civic intervention, advocacy, and all of that through the examples that you presented in your presentation. So I was wondering, did you see any sort of impact in the imagination of the people affected through all of these interventions, through all of this, civic movement, through all of the contestations and negotiations? Did you see any change in the imagination of what planning means for the people who are affected themselves through this process? Maybe we'll start with a response from Manali.
Yeah. Thank you for both the questions. I'll Brinda just join me, huh? I'll start with the first one. Um, so uh, when we talk about urbanization, my entire thinking is that the entire differentiation that we have created, urban versus rural, that itself is a problem because that itself creates a hard boundary. So what we have been studying and what we have been thinking along is that what if we actually blur that boundary? What if the rural and that urban merge somewhere? And that's when actually we start having these the suburbs as a very different trajectory of development. So it's not maybe what I would say is that it's not a co-housing project that is a solution, but maybe on a larger stage where we can actually think about all occupations, all cultures, and we start blurring those boundaries between those suburb and urban and rural, and we start in a continuation of what flows where. Basically it is about completing the ecosystem. That's what we are realizing, and that ecosystem sometimes needs somebody coming in on and off, not always staying there. And that scope somehow in our urban development is missing. So, yeah. The second one, I would. I just opened this paper. I would just read it out because this is something we have discussed a lot in this research. There's this one line where dwelling is interpreted as a concept that extends beyond a built form and is rather studied as the manner in which living patterns are manifested in the physical reality. That's our take, because we also actually thought a lot about which word to use, because it is not homemaking. Home for them is the one that is there in the native settlement, and this one is a temporary sort of place to stay. So that's when we realize that it is the notion of home is also problematic if we use that word. That's why dwelling. Yeah. Sorry, I'll just Brinda, do you want to add something?
Like, not properly. But my major interest was paper and this conference was that communities such as naturalists migrating into newer urban areas and what are their livelihoods are all about and how do they really find their dwellings, places, find to stay and also sort of negate between the boundaries of what is legal and what is illegal. So maybe, yeah. Sorry, I could not hear the questions properly, but I would put this as a conclusion to the.
Thanks, Brinda. Kalki, you can pick up the response to your question.
Thank you so much for the question. So when we also look at the question is like how did the spectacle also affect the people's ability to resist? And I just think that so because there was not a lot of representation or even participation that really happened within the development or the planning side of the Bhopal smart city when it started off, what it did that the spectacle almost became like a tool to manufacture that consent for the smart city in a way that okay, this is something that's incredible that's coming in, that's a world class city that we are building. The innovation is going to bring a lot of capital in. So these are all the points of reference that were given in. And when that was done, there was almost like no conversation that really led to okay, when does that resistance come in? There was no space for that resistance. And despite that, it has come in from three ends that we see. So one way, when the resistance, for example, happens from this, from the activists, from the dispossessed slum dwellers, or even from the traders union, the resistance is almost seen as if it's in a way something that's a deterrent to development, and this also comes from the perspectives and during my field work with the Bhopal Smart City Corporation and with the municipal councillors, that when questioned about what is your perception of the resistance, how is rehabilitation going on, there is a lack of clarity that was there, but also at the same time their perception on the same thing was that okay, it's almost as if the people are not really aware enough of what's coming in and they are not really looking at the larger picture. So it's like resistance is almost being ridiculed at points to just be that okay, but in 10 to 15 years something will come up and then you will see the value of it. At the same time, the people who are dispossessed are losing their livelihoods and just their even spaces that you live and thrive in on an everyday. So that is one end, but at the same time, the same spectacle which is giving it is this hyper visibility. We also see that when a group which is made up of the urban elite of the city, who is proposed to be okay, this is where the area based development would happen, when they use that hyper visibility and the same speculation to their benefit because of the social strata they belong to, that works well. There is resistance then is successful in the same case. So these are also the gradations that I am kind of also looking at and developing on further. So that's all I had to say on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kalki. Over to Ashwini and Sudhanshu.
Yeah, so the examples that we presented were mainly the resistance that came for the development and specific, the change in reservation or how the open space should be developed were initiated by the people who were affected by it to begin with. So, just another example that we had is the Oval Maidan in the city, which is a heritage precinct, is also started by the citizens who were living around that area. And they realized that, okay, the space is just not working well. It's a recreation space and we need to do something about it. So the involvement of the experts was something initiated from the citizens, and hence all the examples that we are even showing in the paper are mainly coming from the people who are being affected by it, and the change that they saw over the time when they put up the legal interventions. They intervened with the BMC, they intervened with the varied stakeholders, experts like architects and legal background people. So they brought together this spectrum of stakeholders who got involved from different perspectives in understanding what is exactly happening to an open space in the city. And now that is that many of them have become like these templates on how you can negotiate with these open spaces, and the city is talking about them and trying to understand, okay, is this a replicable model that maybe that has happened in the heritage precinct? Can we apply the same thing maybe in the northern part of the city? So in terms of civic engagement and the people who are affected by these examples, we try to bring out as many as the cases which are initiated by the people who are affected by the whatever the issues that the spaces were being affected by. Yeah, that would be the response. If Sudhanshu, if you want to add anything to this. Yeah.
No additions.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the presenters, and thank you to the audience for sticking around, asking questions, and being quite a great set of people to be here. Over to the organizing team for the next announcement. Thank you.